This incident blew up in March 2020. One, in the middle of lockdowns and stuff. It's a story about someone whose ambition was bigger than their ethics and the law, and it comes back to bite them. At the time, I was working as a manager in a mid-sized business. While I was there, I was assigned a new member to my team. I'll call her Evil. Evil was in her mid-20s and pretty fresh out of college. She was the kind of person who could talk your ear off about all of her ideas and plans and what she was working on, but never really seemed to have anything to show for it. When I talked to her about clients complaining that she wasn't getting back to them, she would always have an excuse about how difficult they were, how snowed under she was, and how she had written an email, but it must have gotten lost in spam. So on and so forth. Basically, never her fault. It got to the point where, after one of our monthly meetings, I called her in and explained that if she couldn't get her tasks done, she needed to let us know so we could help delegate resources to make sure things weren't slipping through the cracks. I'll admit, I was pretty direct. Her performance was impacting the whole team, and my job was literally to keep the team on track. I get that people can be under pressure, that there can be stuff going on at home which impacts work, and that sometimes people need a bit of help. But if every time I ask about a project you say, yep, everything's good, I've got it under control, and then it all falls apart and your only response is to blame the client, then we have a problem. I explained that I wasn't going to start formal performance management or anything like that. But from now on, I'd like her to check in with me on Monday mornings for 10 minutes to go over objectives for the week and to check if she needed support with any of her clients. I know it isn't fun to be micromanaged, so I tried to keep these check-ins short and mostly just offer assistance on stuff. She clearly hated my guts, though, and apparently was hatching her own revenge. Now, part of my role included use of a purchasing card, which wasn't in my name, but I had access to. I was given the card to basically make small purchases for the office or spend up to $500 on clients. The card was kept in an office I shared with another team manager where we both could access it when we needed it. One day I get a call from accounts asking about a few abnormal purchases on the card. A Photoshop subscription, a couple of Uber Eats orders, an HBO subscription, etc. I say, I don't know anything about them and they should check with the other team manager. Apparently, the other team manager didn't know anything about them either, because after the weekend, I got called into the big boss's office. After my colleague and I had denied involvement, accounts had started calling Adobe and Uber and stuff to find out where the transactions were coming from. They said that not only were the accounts in my name, they were registered to an email address with my name in it too. I can't describe what it felt like to be in that meeting. I felt physically sick. I couldn't work out what was happening. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was about to get fired and I couldn't understand how that was even possible. The director was going on about how access to the card was a privilege and that I had signed an agreement about appropriate use and so on and so forth. I denied that I had been using it inappropriately and the boss listened, but I could tell he wasn't that convinced. To be honest, in my head, I was gaslighting myself and worrying that I had somehow saved the card in Google and maybe my wife had been accidentally using it or something. It was terrible, and I found myself apologizing and saying, I don't know how this happened. I assure you that I know that none of those expenses are appropriate uses of company funds. There must have been some kind of mistake. Can I please have the details and look into it, etc.? When I finally got out of that office, job still intact. Well, barely. Evil was waiting for me at my office door. She was grinning from ear to ear and sweetly explained she had been waiting for our morning meeting. I told her something had come up and we'd do the meeting tomorrow, and she said, "Oh, will you be in tomorrow?" Confused, since I didn't know I was in a revenge thread at the time, I just replied, "Yes, why would I not be in tomorrow?" And she just sipped her tea and said, "Oh, no reason," turned around and went back to her desk. Something felt off, but I was still worrying about what had happened with the boss. So I spent the next couple of hours calling my wife, calling Adobe, and doing the same legwork that accounts had done. It became very obvious that someone had been using my name and the company card to spend a bunch of money online. Had I been hacked or something? Personal info on the dark web, and these hackers just really wanted Photoshop and Wendy's delivered? It was the Uber Eats that was her undoing. After getting on the phone and talking through what had gone on, and obviously giving my name for the account and everything, the fellow on the phone told me where the food had been delivered. It was in our city, which made me rule out straight away any notion of my day being sold online or something. Now, I was suspicious and pissed. I don't like to think the worst of people, but now I was. Listening to my gut, I pulled up Evil's employee information and checked her address. I pulled it up on Google Maps, dropped a pin on her place, and then looked for the address Uber Eats had given me. It was the corner of her effing block. I was furious. When she left work for the day, I got IT to give me access to her laptop. There were some things she had been smart about. The IP address she had been using was the office, which would have tied back to me. She had even had the food delivered to a different address. She had even made a fake email address. But saving her passwords on a work computer was a mistake. I called the boss that night and explained what I had found and kept the IT guy with me to support the fact that I hadn't just logged into her computer and made it all up. The next day, the boss called her into the office and fired her so bad there were red trucks lining up outside the building. When she teary-eyed left his office, I made sure I was standing in the hall sipping a cup of tea. It had gotten cold while I waited for her, but still tasted sweet. I hope she went home that night because if she did, she would have received some nice Goodbyes Wendy's delivered by Uber Eats, paid for on my personal card, of course. Revenge and justice can be the same thing, right? In the end, she was fired. The boss apologized, and we were on good terms when I left in October for a new gig. So this happened a few months ago while I was working retail seasonally. I was working in a garden center in Ireland. I was the main checkout worker, so I was alone at the checkout. The till area is sort of its own area, because of course it's a big complex of garden furniture, decor, plants, etc. And to be honest, it can get boring during lulls because there's nothing really to do there as a till worker. So we were allowed to turn on the radio to play music for the day, and in fact it was something management insisted on. Just easy listening radio so as not to annoy customers, but it made it less boring. I don't know if this is the same elsewhere, but on Irish radio, no matter the station, it's pretty much guaranteed that the radio station will do a news read every 2 hours. Usually no political slant on music stations, just a read of the top stories, including on politics, but of course, the newsreaders don't take an opinion on the stories. Well, this particular day, it was a slow day. It's about an hour before closing, and I'm sort of just passing time listening to the music when the 5 o'clock news read plays. Very basic stuff. Crime, traffic, etc. Except for the last story, which is about a policy the government was considering at the time which would put more restrictions on people protesting outside hospitals that offer abortion services. Now, quick side note, both on my beliefs and Ireland, I am vehemently pro-choice and have campaigned for choice before. But of course, I would never get into debates with customers because 1, it's not worth my time, and 2, it's not really the appropriate space. And for some context on Ireland, as a country with a deeply Catholic history, we only very recently managed to turn the tide on our abortion laws, with 2018 being the year we voted to repeal the amendment of our Constitution that banned it. But as I say, not worth my time to debate this at work. And to be honest, not really worth it to debate it here because, as I say, the position you or I have isn't important here. This news story was literally just about a proposal the government was vaguely considering at the time. Well, this story plays, and it ends with a statement from someone, I think a hospital worker, in which they say the protesters outside the hospital are a little disruptive and intimidating to patients. Now, I cannot stress this enough. The channel was not taking a position. It was just talking about the policy and got a statement from someone affected by the protesting. Well, this Karen, I want to say late 40s to early 50s, but typical wealthy Irish Range Rover driver, comes in and immediately says, practically shouts, "How can you listen to those lies all day?" At this point, I'm dumbfounded because I was only vaguely listening to the news. I was beginning my cleanup for the day because I didn't want to hang around after closing. The conversation was as follows, as much as I can remember. Me, what? Karen, still raised voice. You heard me. How can you listen to those lies all day? Me, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you mean. Karen, those lies on the radio. You know, it would really put me off coming in here. People are allowed to be pro-life. Me, ignoring the abortion issue because it's not exactly the thing I want to talk about right then. Oh, I don't control the radio. Karen, well, that radio news is all lies. You should turn it off. It's really off-putting for customers. Anyway, 3 bags of soil. Me, my manager chose the station. I'm sorry, but you'll have to take it up with her. So 3 bags of soil? Karen, you know I actually won't come back in if I hear that again. It's not acceptable to be playing those lies to your customers. Me, right? Do you want your soil or not? Karen, getting annoyed I won't engage with her. Yeah, but I'll be complaining to head office. Me, that'll be extra. She paid, then left in a huff. I called one of the guys to help her with her stuff, sent her out to wait by her car for them, and said discreetly over the earpieces to be careful. She seemed to be in a mood and not to engage with her. He came back in and said she seemed to huffing about abortion politics, and he and I had a good chuckle about it. Mentioned it to my manager, and she said if I was to see her again, I should call her down and she'd keep an eye. If she said anything else, she'd be barred. Nice to have a manager actually on your side. Definitely not the only Karen story I have from that place or even any retail place I've worked during my past few years at uni, but it was definitely the one that I was most dumbfounded by. Like others, it was entitlement. This lady just seemed like she was spoiling for a fight. So, I was working my very first job, and it was the 90s before the term Karen got its slang meaning, but the behavior is still the same. I was a teenager, doing janitorial work at a local deli. It was winter, or as wintry as the city I used to live in got. Mostly, it was a lot of wind. In fact, on this day, it was in excess of 40 miles per hour, but I still needed to go out and sweep. I still can hardly believe that in 40-plus miles per hour wind, people will still sit outside to eat. Some are unfazed and others just hate it the whole time, but persist for some reason. It's beyond me. Dirt and trash is blowing around. The sweeping was mostly grabbing trash that gets caught and to dust away dirt that piled up in random spots. And tables still need to be wiped down regularly. So I was on my third sweep of the outdoor eating area, and some guy in business clothes that were wildly flapping in the wind was outside trying to have lunch. It kind of looked like he was summoning some mysterious power or something dramatic like that. As I made my way past his table, he pointed into the wind and shrieked, "Where's that wind coming from?" I looked down the street and pointed in the same direction, then asked, "You see that giant fan?" There actually turned out to be a tall antenna with one of those drum things on it in that direction. In surprise, he yelled, "What?" I think he may have actually believed me for just a moment. Then he scowled and angry repeated his question. I can't remember the words I used, but I gave him the textbook definition of wind that is memorized in earth science class. "Don't get smart with me," he yelled back. After he told me not to get smart with him, I just said, "Okay, so the wind is actually coming from that giant fan over there. We pay a fee to the city for it." As I walked off, the guy yelled, "Why would you do such a thing? I'm going to complain about this for kicks." I told my boss about it right after. He just laughed like he'd heard it before and said he's heard that once since he was my age doing my job when his dad was still running the business. I will change the names to protect my job. A bit of background, I've worked in public education at site for over 25 years. The supervisor was a new one with a questionable past. I was newly elected union president. The supervisor did not like me and I think felt threatened by my mere existence and went after me. Wrong move, Skippy. From the beginning of the educational term, my supervisor, ND, and I clashed. They seemed to go out of their way to find something to talk with me about, write me up for, or simply question me about it. At first, I chalked it up as trying to figure out what I did and how things ran, but it became obvious that it was going after me and wanting to get me fired. Well, let's just say, as a long-term employee in a public education system with a strong union, I'm fairly protected. Add to that, I am the union president of that strong union. Add Kevlar to that protection. That is not to say I could not lose my job. It just needed to be criminal and a felony. I will try to keep the rest of the story short. After multiple petty meetings, conference summaries, and write-ups, I got tired of it. I started to push back and I would not talk, even in public spaces, to ND. They were invisible to me. I did not hear them. I did not talk with them. In fact, I would ask someone to give them a message while I was standing in front of them. Needless to say, this made them frustrated. If they wanted to talk with me, there was always another person from the union in the room with me. On one occasion, IK fishing expositions, my reply was, "I will not answer that questions with my attorney present." And no, it was not an investigation of criminal nature. ND kept rephrasing the questions, hoping I would slip up or answer. "Nope, I'm smarter than you." I answered the questions that did not answer NAD's intended path, but would not answer the questions he wanted to nail me for. This made him so frustrated that he started to threaten my job and reassign me. Nope, Skippy, you cannot do that. He sent me a directive that I was to check in with his assistant each morning, check out for my lunch in the back end, and then check out each day. If the assistant was not presented, I was directed to text both ND and the assistant if I was away from my desk. I was also instructed to only work my duty time, and I could not work outside my day. Okay, not a problem. Each morning I would walk past ND's office and check in. Every time I had to go to the copier, I would text them both. Every time I used the restroom, I would text them both. Every time I had to talk with someone away from my desk, I texted them. This got fun quickly. If I got called into a meeting by the dean or other higher administration, I told them I was not allowed away from my desk off a classroom without ND's permission and that they needed to call him to get that permission. Needless to say, I was following the directive to the letter and blowing up things with a smile. This lasted about 2 weeks before the dean and others started to get annoyed by the actions and directive of ND. The increased pressure upon ND became increased pressure on me. Yep, he was not getting the message and digging his heels in because he's the boss and I was just a subordinate. When I was fed up, I brought in the regional union representative and they started to get very clear with not only ND, but the president of the educational institution that the next meeting would involve the union attorney. And we would be filing legal action under the state and federal laws in regard to union busting. Big dollars in attorney fees to even start to answer the complaint. By the way, it costs us nothing for our attorneys in filing. Make a long story short, my life got much easier. He was not allowed to talk with me and he was placed on administrative leave for the remainder of the year and never returned to educational employment in the area. And for me, life is great and I am happy to work more hours than I am paid for and I do not need to text anyone when I have to pee. Winner